אני מאוד שמח לפתוח את הכנס השישי של התוכנית לכלכלה וחברה בנושאים שקשורים לתקציב. בשש השנים האלה אנחנו למדנו כמה דברים. דבר אחד זה שמאוד חשוב לארגן כנס כזה בדיוק בפתח דיוני התקציב, גם בשביל לשקף את התמונה שצריכה לעמוד כנגד קובעי המדיניות וכדי לקבל את ההחלטות, וגם כדי להציב אלטרנטיבות. זאת אומרת, כשבאים להחליט חשוב מאוד שיהיו אלטרנטיבות, ומה שאנחנו מנסים לעשות זה להציב אלטרנטיבות שעל פי הניסיון שלנו הן לא תמיד מיושמות בזמן אמת בתקציב הקרוב, הרבה פעמים הן מיושמות לאחר מכן בפיגור, ובכל זאת מאוד מאוד חשוב לעשות את זה בזמן ולהשמיע את הדברים. לגבי החלק של תמונת המצב, לצייר את תמונת המצב, יש לנו היום חלק יחסית חדש, שיש בו חלק של התוכנית בחלק עם האורחים שלנו, שהם אורחים שבאו מגרמניה. אותו חלק עוסק בחלק שמנסה להציג מדד של צדק חברתי. זה מדד שיוצג על ידי דניאל Schraad-Tischler, שהוא מברטלסמן סטיפטונג, והוא יציג בהרחבה את המתודולוגיה שהם משתמשים וכדי לבנות מדד עבור מדינות אירופה. אנחנו בהמשך גם נראה יישום של המדד הזה לנתונים של ישראל, וגם נראה לכם מדד שפיתחנו בתוכנית לכלכלה וחברה. בחלק השני, שהוא החלק המסורתי על תרחישים על התקציב, אנחנו נציג בהתחלה מצגת משלנו עם התרחישים, ולאחר כך יתקיים פאנל שידון בהיבטים השונים. כדי לפתוח את החלק הראשון, אני רוצה להזמין את ריצ'רד אסבק, שהוא הנציג של קרן זיידל. אני רוצה בהזדמנות זאת להודות לקרן זיידל, שהוא תומך בכנס שלנו כבר בשנה השנייה. So I say it also in English. Richard Asbek, that represents the Zayedel Foundation here in Israel. He will give some opening remarks, and immediately afterwards we'll get to the presentation by Daniel, and we'll continue from there. אנחנו נבקש, אם יהיו שאלות הבהרה במהלך ההרצאות, אז הם מקובל, אפילו זה בסדר, כאילו אם יש משהו לא ברור, זה בסדר לשאול. לגבי הערות או איזה שהן הצעות לשיפור, אני מדבר כרגע על החלק הראשון, אנחנו מעדיפים שזה יקרה בסוף ההרצאות. בסדר? אז הוא ייתן את ההרצאה, אחר כך אני אתן את ההרצאה, ואז נשאיר איזשהו זמן לקבל הערות או שאלות, הצעות לשיפור וכו'. בסדר? אז ככה נתנהל ונתחיל. בבקשה.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michel. Ladies and gentlemen, for us it's a pleasure to welcome you here as well. It's the second time actually that we have the chance to cooperate with the Economic and Society program of Lehr Institute. It's a true cooperation. We always supply, so to say, an interesting topic also from Germany in order to enrich the discussion about the annual budget here in Israel. Last year, for instance, we had a researcher of the Institute for Employment Research in Germany who talked about the hard to place unemployed and gave some experience how we deal with the phenomenon of unemployment and how to render these unemployed persons into the workforce. This year, we have the pleasure to talk about something which is much more focused, I feel, for the current situation here in Israel. We are talking about social justice, a topic which since the year 2011 has been center stage in your country and which deserves a lot of research, we believe. It flares up in the media all the time. Sometimes we see really also those rather almost polemic articles that the Milky is more cheap in Berlin, and this is why a lot of people are traveling to Berlin now. But indeed, we should present, I feel, much more empiric, much more solid research to make things comparable. And when we encountered this excellent study done by the Bertelsmann Stiftung about a social justice index, which was applied only for the countries of the European Union and the OECD, well, in this study only European Union, we thought this is a great chance to also make a study about Israel for comparative reasons. I asked Michel, since I'm not an economist, whether it's possible. He looked at the numbers and the methodology, said, yes, let's do it. And it gives us an empiric basis to really compare Israel to the European Union, which can be helpful, and also to identify policies at a later stage. I'm very happy that Bertelsmann Stiftung in person came here to present the methodology, to be open for questions, to be open for cooperations with Israeli institutions. And let me shortly say something about Bertelsmann Stiftung, since I also used to work for them 12, 13 years ago. Bertelsmann Stiftung has been founded by a very prominent and successful German entrepreneur, Reinhard Mohn, who has created the media empire of Bertelsmann. You may not know the name because it's a family-owned business and it's not stock market listed, but he's the owner of Random House, he's the owner of RTL Television in Europe, megabucks all over the world. This gentleman, Reinhard Mohn, who's not living anymore, is also a great social entrepreneur. Since, like Warren Buffett has announced to do, he gave 80% of his wealth into his own foundation. And out of this dividend which he receives, he created this think tank, Bertelsmann Stiftung, which is very known in Germany. And the focus is always the same. He wants to find out what kind of customer orientation is there in the public sector. What kind of ranking can we do? How can we create some competition, so to say, within the public sector to really find out where things are doing good and where things are doing less good? Performance measurement, so to say. I used to work in a performance measurement thing applied to public libraries. So he was focusing on what the reader actually wants to read, the customer, not what the librarian really wants the reader to read. With this system, he went to Egypt, by the way. This was my job in that time. And they opened the first public library in Egypt, called, at that time, the Mubarak Public Library. Now it's called the Misr Public Library for obvious political reasons. It's very close to the Israeli embassy on the Nile River. Owned actually formerly this villa by Abdel Hakim Amr. I don't know whether you know him. He was the commanding general in the Six-Day War in 1967, who had to commit suicide after Egypt lost against Israel. Anyhow, in this beautiful villa on the Nile, Reinhard Mohn and the Bertelsmann Stiftung tried to apply performance measurement in public library. I tell you just this because if you apply customer orientation only in this very project, we only would have had to offer Islamic and religious literature to the users. So there are limitations for customer orientation in the public sector, I feel. Limitations we have also found with this system of Bertelsmann Stiftung, which studies the social justice in a country, because the indicators are not always relevant for Israel. So this is why Michel also presents his own social justice index, which compares today's situation of social justice in Israel with former years. This is about what I wanted to say. I think it's a great opportunity to bring empirics here, to exchange also experience of ranking, of thinking how we can identify good policies via empirical studies. And I'm glad that Van Leer Institute has taken up these ideas so favorably, and that we are going to have later on a discussion also with Chevray Knesset, who are going to join us. So thank you very much to us for coming to this conference. I think it will be a very interesting afternoon. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the warm welcome and the kind invitation. It's indeed a great pleasure to be here and also a great honor for me to have the opportunity to speak at this important conference here in Jerusalem. It's the first time for me to be here, and I must say I'm deeply impressed, and so thank you very much again. And well, the organizers asked me to speak about the topic of social justice, and in this context to present the approach and the key findings of our study on social justice in the EU, which we published in September last year. And this cross-national comparison of all 28 EU countries, which I'm going to present to you now in the next 30 minutes or so, has been really well received so far. We had extensive media coverage in I think more than 30 countries, not only in European countries, but also in the US, in Russia, in China, and even in Cuba, which was quite surprising to us. And we also got many, for the most part, positive reactions from policymakers in many European capitals, but also from the institutions in Brussels, for instance, from the European Commission and from the European Parliament. The Social Justice Index, which we constructed as a kind of yardstick for measuring social justice for this cross-national comparison, is based on selected quantitative and qualitative indicators that we use within the framework of our so-called Sustainable Governance Indicators project, which I'm responsible for at the Bertelsmann Foundation. And this is a major international index project run by the Bertelsmann Foundation that compares all OECD and EU countries on a regular basis. And also, we are planning to update this EU Social Justice Index on an annual basis now, and the next edition is to be released in October this year with a special focus on the opportunities and life chances of children and young people in Europe, in the European Union. This is just to give you an impression of the media coverage we had. I just skipped this and come to the theoretical and normative background of our study. Just a few remarks on that. To start with, I know that social justice is a very difficult term, and defining what social justice means is often subject to controversy, certainly. Nevertheless, I think that a modern concept of social justice that refers to the aim of realizing de facto equal opportunities for each individual offers a conceptual ideal that many people, also from different ideological strands, should subscribe to or should be able to subscribe to. Conceiving social justice in this way means that state and society bear the responsibility of creating and expanding equal opportunities for all persons in a society, and such a paradigm of justice is informed, for instance, by the theories of Amartya Sen or John Rawls, for instance, and it suggests that establishing social justice depends less on compensating for exclusion than it does on investing in inclusion. So that's the key idea behind this paradigm of social justice. And that means that specific social or socioeconomic or cultural backgrounds must not be allowed to negatively affect one's opportunities to succeed in life. And in our study on social justice in the EU, we try to draw on at least some of these normative basic assumptions. Our approach of measuring social justice covers 6 dimensions, as you can see on this slide. It's pretty small, and I will explain what you should be able to see on the slide. We cover 6 dimensions related to the concept of social justice. First, poverty prevention, then we look at access to education, labor market inclusiveness, then a category that we call social cohesion and non-discrimination, health, as well as to questions of intergenerational justice. And each dimension is measured by several indicators. For the most part, we draw on data from public official statistics, mainly from Eurostat, which is the EU's official statistical office, and from the OECD, obviously. I don't want to go too much into details here, just to give you some examples. The first dimension is, as you see, prevention of poverty, and the effective prevention of poverty plays a key role in measuring social justice, because under conditions of poverty, social participation and a self-determined life are almost impossible. So the prevention of poverty is in a certain sense a necessary precondition for social justice. And in this dimension we use the indicator at risk of poverty or social exclusion, which is also one of the headline indicators in the EU's so-called 2020 strategy. This indicator is comprised again of several sub-dimensions which were also taken into consideration in our analysis. For instance, we looked at the level of child poverty, material deprivation among the population, and the number of people living in quasi-jobless households. So this is what we looked at in this dimension of poverty prevention. Then the second dimension, equal access to good quality education, is certainly another very essential factor in providing equal opportunities and life chances. Social or cultural background must not be allowed to negatively affect educational success, and that's why we look in this area, among others, at the impact of a student's socio-economic background on his or her educational success. That's very important, a very important indicator that we get from the OECD, from the PISA studies. We also look at the aspect of early school leavers, the number of early school leavers, the aspect of pre-primary education, which is also important in the context of social justice, as well as at the level of inclusiveness of educational systems more generally. The third dimension refers to labor market inclusiveness. The labor market's degree of inclusiveness is likewise of considerable importance to social justice. Exclusion from the labor market substantially limits individual opportunities for self-realization. It can contribute to an increase in the risk of poverty, and it can even lead to serious health stresses. So that's why this idea or this dimension of labor market inclusiveness is also very important in our framework of measuring social justice. Here in this dimension we use 11 different indicators on employment and unemployment, broken down to different age groups and social groups. For instance, we look at long-term, the rate of long-term unemployment, youth unemployment, low-skilled unemployment, the ratio of foreign-born to native employment, and so on. And with regard to the question of precarious working conditions, we included indicators such as low-pay incidence among low-skilled workers, or the number of people who are involuntarily employed on temporary working contracts. So this is to do justice to the to the phenomenon of precarious working conditions. The fourth dimension, social cohesion and non-discrimination, examines the extent to which trends towards social polarization, exclusion, and the discrimination of specific groups are successfully counted in a society. Here, for instance, we look at aspects of gender equality, income polarization, the effectiveness of anti-discrimination policies, as well as at the integration of migrants into society. Then we have the fifth dimension, health. Here we assess each country's healthcare system with regard to the criteria of inclusiveness and quality of healthcare services, using also different indicators. Here I don't go into details. And then we finally have the dimension of intergenerational justice, which is comprised of three major components. The first component addresses policy support for both younger and older generations in terms of family and pension policies. The second component focuses on the idea of environmental sustainability by using indicators such as the level of greenhouse gas emissions or the share of renewable energy. And the third component is concerned with economic and fiscal sustainability. Here we look at the level of national debt as a mortgage to be paid by future generations in terms of intergenerational justice, as well as at the level of spending on research and innovation or development as a potential investment in future prosperity. So this is, in a nutshell, our approach of measuring social justice. And when combining and aggregating all these different dimensions and indicators, we get this overall ranking for all 28 EU countries. And if it's too small, I explain what you should see on this slide. Very generally, at the top of the ranking, we have the usual suspects, the Nordic countries, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, as well as Netherlands. And these countries score particularly well in the areas of poverty prevention, labor market access, social cohesion, and non-discrimination. And at the bottom of the list, we mainly find the Southern European crisis states and some Southeastern European countries. We have Italy, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, and Greece comes in on last place, which is certainly not so surprising. However, what is much more interesting than this overall distribution of countries is the fact that we can clearly observe a clear negative overall trend in terms of social justice for the majority of EU countries. In most countries, the level of social justice has clearly declined in recent years, and there are only very few exceptions, namely Poland and Germany, showing at least a slightly positive trend over the last years. And in this broader context, one can furthermore observe that there has been a growing social divide within the European Union. The social imbalance between the still wealthy northern European countries and the southern and southeastern European countries has considerably intensified over the course of the crisis. So while there is still a high level of social inclusion in countries such as Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and also the Netherlands, social injustice in countries such as Greece, Spain, Italy, but also Hungary and Ireland has massively increased. And you can see this when you look at these small red numbers here that indicate the change from the 2008 index values to the 2014 index values. And as you see, the majority of the numbers is in red color, which indicates that there's been a deterioration in terms of social justice. And with regard to the southern European countries in particular, this deterioration has certainly been intensified by the rigid austerity measures that have been implemented in the course of the crisis, aimed at economic and budget stabilization. And furthermore, another general observation is that alongside the north-south divide, we can also observe a growing imbalance between the generations. Young people are much harder hit by social injustice than those who are older. Just to give you a few or two key figures here, 28% of children and young people are threatened by poverty or social exclusion right across the EU, which is significantly more than it was in 2009. And poverty among elderly people, by contrast, has not increased over the same period of time, interestingly. And another point underlining the bad situation of the younger generations, especially in the southern European countries, is certainly youth unemployment. In Greece and in Spain, we have rates of youth unemployment nearly at 60% now, which is, from the perspective of social justice, certainly a disaster. Let me briefly go through the different subdimensions as well. So here you see the overall distribution in terms of prevention of poverty. What we can see is that over the last years we had an EU-wide increase in poverty. According to the data we used, this indicator, poverty or social exclusion, used by Eurostat, we have more than 25% of the total population that are at risk of poverty or social exclusion, which is clearly higher than in 2009, almost 2 percentage points higher, which is significant related to the absolute numbers behind it. And 28%, I already mentioned that, of children are at risk of poverty or social exclusion, which is also nearly 2 percentage points higher than in 2009. And we see a rapid increase in poverty among younger people, particularly in the crisis countries of Europe's south. For instance, in Greece, the level of material deprivation among children has more than doubled over the last 6 years. Today, more than 20% of the Greek children face severe material deprivation, and also the general income poverty level has increased substantially to nearly 35% now, which is quite disturbing. The next dimension is on education, and here we see that Sweden, Denmark, Finland, the Nordic countries again, but also some Baltic states like Lithuania and Estonia, and also, maybe quite surprisingly, Croatia are the top-ranking EU countries in this dimension. Just to pick out one or two aspects here, the influence of a student's social background on his or her educational performance is least evident in Finland and Estonia. At the same time, these two countries attained the best results in the last PISA survey of learning achievement levels, which clearly demonstrates that a higher level of quality in the in the education system and a high degree of social justice need not be incompatible goals. This is there's no trade-off. This is quite important to see, and there are many countries which have a lot of catching up to do in this regard, including Germany, which only ranks 14th here in this respect. So there's still a lot of room for improvement here in terms of creating equal access to education. With regard to labor market access, labor market inclusiveness, overall labor market access opportunities have deteriorated in the broad majority of EU member states over the course of the crisis. In the last several years, the EU has come no closer to the goal declared as part of the so-called Europe 2020 strategy, which aims to reach an employment level of 75%. Indeed, this rate has even declined from 66% in 2008 to today roughly 63%. So also a negative development in this regard. And the EU-wide problems with justice within the labor market are above all evident in the unequal distribution of access opportunities for various at-risk groups within society. Unemployment among youth and low-skilled individuals, for example, is a massive problem not only in the crisis-struck Southern European and Southeastern European countries, but also in countries such as Slovakia and Ireland. And in these countries, the situation has additionally developed into an extremely high rate of long-term unemployment, which is quite a worrisome development because high rates of long-term unemployment are among the greatest risk factors for poverty and social exclusion. So this is very disturbing as well. And also problematic are distinct trends in almost all countries towards a dual labor market, with in some cases dramatic increases in so-called atypical or non-standard forms of employment, with a very low degree of vertical permeability. So it's not possible to move up from non-standard forms of working or employment to standard forms of employment. Just to give you one example, in Spain and in Cyprus, for instance, more than 90% of people with temporary work contracts are involuntarily in such kind of employment. And Greece, which also is ranked last year on the dimension of labor market inclusiveness, saw a very strong deterioration over the crisis, over the last years. I already mentioned youth unemployment is at nearly 60% now. Greece has an employment rate below 50%, so a clear decrease in employment. An unemployment rate at nearly 28% and a long-term unemployment rate at nearly 20%. So you see that this is a very negative trend. In terms of social cohesion and non-discrimination, coming to the fourth dimension we looked at, overall, Sweden, the Netherlands, Finland, Denmark, Luxembourg, and also Germany perform quite well and perform best in this category. Tendencies towards discrimination and polarization are still effectively prevented in the comparatively egalitarian societies in the Nordic countries. However, even in these small and homogeneous countries, we see that there's a rising income polarization, except in Finland. And there are also problems related to integration of foreign people of foreign origin. They face smaller opportunities for labor market inclusiveness or participation and education opportunities. So not everything is brilliant in the Nordic countries. There are also deficiencies in these countries, but overall the Nordic countries, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and the EU are the best performers still in terms of social inclusion or social justice. Moreover, a number of EU countries also show very significant tendencies towards discrimination against specific minorities, and this is particularly true with regard to the Roma minority, who are subject to significant discrimination in many southeastern European countries, especially in Hungary, in Romania, and also in Slovakia. So there's this problem with the Roma minority. And fifth, the dimension on health. Here we see that very good conditions in terms of inclusiveness and access to high quality healthcare services prevail in Sweden and Luxembourg, the Netherlands and Belgium, while Romania and Latvia show the greatest shortcomings in this regard. The massive underfunding of the Romanian healthcare system, for example, leads to broad inequalities in treatment and also to a high level of corruption in the system. And problems in Greece have taken a similar course. Here, the harsh austerity measures have led to drastic cuts in the healthcare system, and in addition, rising poverty has meant that many people are not anymore in the position to undergo essential treatment. Coming to the last dimension here of intergenerational justice, in the overall assessment of this dimension, again, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and also Estonia are clear leaders, although also these countries face significant demographic pressures in terms of aging societies. They best succeed in investing in opportunities for young people and families, for instance, by providing a very good childcare infrastructure, preschools and so on, kindergartens. And these countries also perform quite well with regard to the questions of environmental and fiscal sustainability and investment in research and development. Estonia, for instance, has by far the lowest debt level across all EU countries still. And by contrast, the greatest shortcomings with regard to intergenerational justice, as measured here, are evident in the demographically old and highly indebted countries of Italy and Greece, and the prospects are not very promising here. Another quite interesting aspect that can be concluded from our study is that economic prosperity is indeed an important factor, certainly an important factor, but does not automatically guarantee social justice. For example, this can be seen when we look at countries such as Ireland on the one hand and the Czech Republic, Slovenia and Estonia on the other hand. Ireland, for instance, has a similarly high GDP per capita like Sweden, but ranks considerably below average when it comes to social justice. And in fact, it counts as one of the biggest losers in this comparison over the last years. By contrast, countries such as the Czech Republic on rank 5, Slovenia on rank 9 and Estonia on rank 10 show that despite only having average economic performance levels, a relatively high degree of social justice is still possible. So that shows that social justice heavily depends on good policy making, on sound social policies, and not only on economic prosperity and economic prospects. This, I think, is quite clear and is also underlined by recent reports, for instance, by the OECD, which came out at the beginning of this month. Well, what does this mean in terms of some general conclusions? Well, first we would say that the growing social divide between member states and between the generations can lead to serious tensions and a considerable loss of trust, and should the social imbalance last for long or increase even more within Europe, the future of the European integration project will be threatened. And you can see in several countries we already have the rise of extremist or populist parties, for instance. And that's why we say, okay, from our point of view, the topic of social justice should play a much bigger role in European politics in the future. We have many different programs, measures, and technocratic coordinations at the EU level, but there is as yet no integrated strategy which really comprehensively and consistently combines the two key objectives, growth and social justice. So there's no clear overall strategy in this regard. And it would be great if it was possible to bundle all these currently existing different measures, instruments into one such integrated strategy. which really combines these two ideas of social justice and growth, inclusive growth. And it is also necessary to intensify communication around such a new strategy, because a broader public awareness is also absolutely necessary in order to develop strong political leverage for the implementation of social policy goals. And finally, with regard to the member states, well, this is certainly very complicated here for many countries, because they have only very limited room for maneuver after the crisis, on the course of the crisis. But we think it is necessary that the countries, the member states of the European Union, try to steer the right course between fiscal consolidation on the one hand and future-oriented investment on the other hand. Without question, the consolidation of national budgets through consistent debt reduction remains a necessity, especially in the highly indebted crisis countries, also with regard to the idea of intergenerational justice. However, if in pursuing the goal of budgetary consolidation, cuts are the primary step being taken, a distinction should be drawn between short-term and longer-term effects of savings within specific policy areas, because massive cuts in areas such as education or research and development have very negative long-term consequences, not only from the perspective of social justice, but also in economic terms. And I think it is very important to see that there's a potential positive sum relationship between greater social justice on the one hand and economic prosperity on the other hand. And this has also been underlined by a recent, quite comprehensive report by the OECD on the potential negative effects that inequality can have on economic growth. I'm sure that this is also part of the discussion later on here at this conference. So governments should bear in mind that this in mind when designing concrete policy solutions and reforms, and this conclusion applies to all countries, certainly not only to those comprising the EU. And the establishment of equal participation opportunities, and this is my last remark, is both an ethical and normative duty in the interests of greater social justice and a fundamental investment in the sustainability of a society itself. Thank you very much.